If you watch the news, it feels like the Middle East is just this constant, never-ending cycle of conflict. It can be really confusing. But what if I told you there's a hidden logic to it all, a kind of strategic playbook? Well, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to unpack a powerful framework called realism and use it as a brand new lens to understand what's really going on. Right? It's the question we all ask ourselves. We see all these headlines about rising tensions, proxy battles, ceasefires that just don't hold, and the whole thing can feel like a totally unsolvable puzzle. But what if there's a way to actually see the logic behind all the moves? That's our goal here. This quote from the material we're looking at today, it really hits the nail on the head. This isn't random chaos, far from it. Think of it as a high-stakes arena, a chessboard where the players are fighting for the most basic things you can imagine: survival, power, and control over vital resources. So, how do we start to piece this puzzle together? Well, it's not about trying to memorize every single event. It's about getting our hands on the right tool, the right kind of analytical lens, to see how all the pieces actually connect and what's really driving the action behind the scene. Okay, so let's talk about that tool. We're going to be using a theory from international relations known as realism. Honestly, the best way to think about it is as a playbook that helps explain the deep-down strategic motivations of all the players on the board. It's designed to cut through all the noise and focus on what it argues are the real core drivers of conflict. So what is realism exactly? Well, it's a way of looking at the world that strips politics down to its absolute essentials. It starts with this idea that, on the world stage, there's no global 911 you can call. It's an anarchic system, meaning every country is basically on its own. So while we hear a lot about ideology or culture, realism says, nope, the ultimate driver is much simpler. It's all about the cold, hard logic of survival and power. And here are the basic rules of the game, according to the realist worldview. First, for any nation, nothing is more important than security, your own survival. Number two, like we said, there's no world police, so you can only truly count on yourself for protection, which leads to number three. To guarantee that survival, you need power, especially military power. And that makes the fourth point make a lot of sense. Building up your army or making alliances isn't necessarily about starting a war. From a realist point of view, it's the most logical, rational thing you can do to keep yourself safe. Okay, but if everyone is constantly trying to get more powerful just to stay safe, why isn't the world in a state of all-out constant war? Well, this brings us to a really crucial concept in the realist playbook: deterrence. This is the art of preventing a fight before it even has a chance to start. At its core, deterrence is a mind game. It's all about psychology. It's not just about having powerful weapons. It's about convincing your opponent that you are absolutely ready and willing to use them, and that the pain for them will be just catastrophic. It's all about making the price of attacking you way too high to even consider paying. And deterrence really comes in two main flavors. On one hand, you've got deterrence by denial. This is all about building an impenetrable fortress. Think of things like sophisticated missile shields and air defenses that make an enemy think, you know what, my attack probably won't even work. Then you have deterrence by punishment. This is less about defense and more about offense. It's sending a very clear message. Go ahead, attack me, but the counterattack will be so devastating, you won't know what hit you. All right, so now we have our realist lens, and we understand this core concept of deterrence. So let's do it. Let's apply this framework to that real-world chessboard of the Middle East and see what it tells us about how the key players operate. This rivalry between Israel and Iran is a perfect example of what experts call asymmetric conflict. They're not playing the same game. Israel's strength is its technology, its qualitative edge. We're talking advanced aircraft, superior intelligence. Iran knows it can't compete head-to-head on that front, so it focuses on something different: strategic resilience. That's the ability to take a punch and then punch back hard, using its massive arsenal of missiles and its extensive network of proxy forces. And we really have to talk about these proxy networks because they are an absolutely critical piece of this modern puzzle. So, what's a proxy? It's an armed group, like Hezbollah, for example, that gets support from a state, like Iran, but isn't officially part of that state's military. This setup lets a country fight its rivals indirectly, probe their defenses, all while maintaining a degree of what's called plausible deniability. So here's how that playbook works, step by step. First, a state arms and funds a group. Simple enough. Then that group goes out and tests an enemy's defenses, kind of pokes the bear to see how it reacts. Step 3, if anything goes wrong, the state can just wash its hands of it and say, hey, that wasn't us. But here's the really dangerous part, the fourth step. This whole setup creates this incredible fog of war. And in that fog, it is so easy for one side to miscalculate and accidentally trigger a much, much bigger war. So let's zoom out for a second. We've looked at the theory, we've looked at the players and their playbooks. So what's the big picture here? What does this realist lens actually reveal about what's driving this constant instability in the region? When you put it all together, our realist lens shows us four big interconnected problems. You have that power imbalance, that asymmetry, which pushes weaker players to use proxies just to level the playing field. Then you have the spread of cheap but effective missile technology, which makes it easier than ever to threaten your rivals from a safe distance. All of this feeds into proxy warfare, which, as we saw, creates a huge risk of miscalculation. And finally, these contests for power often happen in the vacuums left behind by fragile or failed states, turning local problems into huge regional battlegrounds. Now, the great thing about the realist lens is that it doesn't just diagnose the problem. Because it sees the world as this big strategic game, it also suggests a very specific set of moves for how you can manage that game and hopefully avoid the worst-case scenario. So these are the kinds of policy tools that logically follow from this analysis. First, you bolster your defenses to make any attack too costly. That's classic deterrence by denial. Second, you open up lines of communication, like crisis hotlines, so you don't accidentally stumble into a war over a misunderstanding. Third, you go after the proxy networks themselves, disrupting their supply lines and logistics. And finally, you find small, practical areas, even with a rival, where you can cooperate for mutual benefit, like maritime safety, to lower the overall temperature. And that really brings us to our final thought. This realist lens shows us a world of constant competition, of risk, of cold, hard, strategic calculation. It gives us ways to manage conflicts, to strengthen deterrence, and to hopefully pull back from the brink of disaster. But it also leaves us with this really deep and pretty unsettling question. In a game that's so completely defined by power and deterrence, is perpetual competition just inevitable? Or is there maybe another way to play the game?